definition, hygiene and quarantine, I think, are now embraced in the biosecurity term. And I'd just like to emphasise the importance of hygiene, meaning local cleanliness here. And plants and animals grow and reproduce where the conditions suit them, so long as their propagules are present. And for Norfolk Island, there's quite a lot of vulnerability to a wide range of aggressive species that aren't here yet. And I'll just show an example of what I'm talking about. This is saffron thistle growing on Selwyn Pine Road. Just a very, very small patch. I haven't seen it anywhere else on the island. It may be here, but I've only seen that one little patch. Last year I tried to clip them all off and put them in a bag and take them to the dump. I was a bit late, and I think they've seeded, so they're now there again, right on the edge of the concrete, and cars can carry them all around the island, and we really don't want saffron thistle. Nor do we want this thing, which is, an Eragrostis, which is along the road out near the airport and other places. It grows in very compacted soil, and it'll follow cattle paths.
Is
so
that Grady grass?
Not blady grass, no.
Grady.
Could be.
I know what's it, but I've seen it.
I'm just saying hygiene within Norfolk is important, as well as quarantine on bringing species into Norfolk. At any location, there's a suite of plant and animals and microorganisms that operate as an effective system. So foreign organisms may die out because the conditions don't suit them, or they may add to the local suite. Some of the clovers, for example, might add to pasture, or they may become aggressive and disrupt the local system. This is just sort of a bit of basic ecology. In conservation areas, by definition, species arriving after European colonization are deemed to be invaders and unwelcome, but that doesn't apply in farmland. So weed is a matter of policy rather than science. Now, plants can travel around the island in the air, in cattle, in birds' feet, in humans, in luggage, on car tyres, and the importance of it is really quite significant. We hear that a single spore of the fusarium fungus can bring Panama in, and Panama would be, to have Panama here would be a grave disservice to the world, because there are varieties here that are going out in other countries because of Panama. So it really is worth cleansing every passenger, and I would argue that biosecurity is not really taken seriously to this level of intensity. The permit system is okay, but that's only handling one level of the biosecurity issue.
Just a question. When I used to come here, they used to spray you on the plane before you got off. That doesn't happen now, or at least it didn't the last time.
The planes are residual treated with the same chemical, but all of the inside of the plane's residually treated, so that if an insect does get on that plane in Australia and does land on any of the surfaces, it gets a lethal dose and dies.
Okay.
The same as every plane in the world.
We don't die.
Thanks.
I just don't think it's taken seriously at that level of detail of the importation of stuff with people on the planes. Or the cargo. I had a pallet that came from China. It looked perfectly clean, but when it got wet on the ground, all the fungus that came up on that pallet, well, who knows what fungus that was and what damage it might do to Norfolk pines or whatever. Anyway, on Norfolk Island, we would start with the presumption that any species not already here could be a threat to local systems, but plants that come from different climates, like apples, are probably not. Plants that are not known to spread aggressively, like pineapples won't, potatoes, are probably safe. But our conditions are unique, so we just need to be careful, say, if we import blueberries, whether they might in fact become a pest. Anyway, a little bit of political background. Until 1987, the Department of Trade and the Department of Foreign Affairs were separate departments, and there was an amalgamation under the neoliberal economic rationalist reforms. And under Foreign Affairs, trade was regarded as a tool of foreign policy, but when the two departments were amalgamated, the trade economists prevailed in the bureaucratic hierarchy over the scientists and the diplomats in the Foreign Affairs. And I'll argue that ever since then, foreign policy has been subordinated to trade objectives. It's an article of faith amongst economists that free trade is a good thing, and Australia has opened its borders unilaterally, and it's hectored other countries, including the Pacific Island countries, to do the same. We won't go into manufacturing, we'll just stick to agriculture. Biosecurity is seen as a nuisance by trade economists, and there's a tension between scientists and economists in the federal public service. So quarantine services have been weakened for a parallel or different reason, which is the downsizing of the public service generally. So nothing in this paper argues against strict biosecurity, as PJ said. I'm with him on that. But the permit system is not particularly designed for our case, but I think, as PJ said, it can work and it's amenable to being fixed. Oops. Now I've identified what the department has advised and what PJ has actually done. Identify the varieties desired, check that none are on the prohibited list, apply for the permits. Biosecurity will specify the conditions, source the materials. I've preferred to deal in Brisbane because of the climatic similarity, and Fleming's, which operates the biggest nursery in Victoria for bare-rooted, now has a Queensland nursery and deals in subtropicals. I haven't been able to identify many nurseries willing to export directly except the tissue culture, but I've only started my journey for reasons which I'll explain. So then when we identify the nursery, take it to the lab, get it treated according to the conditions, apply to the department for the phytosanitary certificate, have it inspected at the lab, and then arrange transport, and biosecurity will normally allow it through if the paperwork is in order. Okay?
Needs to be inspected here though.
Needs to be inspected here, yeah, they'll inspect it. So I'm just going to give two examples of where I've got to so far and why I haven't done a great deal, apart from the fact that Phil scheduled a meeting at my place this morning, which has preoccupied me for a month. So the citrus, as I read, won't permit bald rootstock, but they will allow budwood. Bald rootstock meaning bald with soil. So, do we have experienced citrus propagators on the island who can insert the budwood? There are some people who are good at it, but are they willing to do this on scale? Do we have enough rootstocks of a compatible kind? No. How many can we accommodate in one shipment? Are there any varieties of citrus that we really do need? And is it worth the bother? I mean, the Norfolk Island grapefruit to me is as nice a grapefruit as I've ever had. And I'd question, why do we need to import 6 varieties of grapefruit? I think there is a food security problem here, but that's not it.
Can I just ask, when you say the Norfolk Island grapefruit, can you actually say what is it? Just because it was grown on Norfolk, or is it a specific species?
It's a variety that people have described to me as a Norfolk Island grapefruit.
Yeah, well, see, that could mean anything. There's a Norfolk Island cow too. There's a lot of cows.
Patricia
It has to be more Pacific.
Patricia Buffett sells what she calls, I think, a Norfolk Island grapefruit.
Yeah, well, she's been to my place too, and I'll just take it one step and say it's a golden queen, and Pat Buffett hasn't got it.
Okay.
So there's different ones here and different, there's horses for courses.
You've actually provided a justification for one of my next slides. So,
5 different types of grapefruits and
Yeah, so which is the Norfolk one? There's plenty. Some people
They're
might
all
say there's a
right.
white coloured one that lasts till Christmas.
and they're all good.
you're actually really reinforcing the conclusion I'm going to come to.
That's what we should be going.
But my point is we've got a lot of bottlenecks in the food security chain, which is labour, land, rootstock, and the lack of varieties of grapefruits, for example, are not the impediment. So blueberries. I found a nursery which will supply tissue culture blueberries, 1,000 of them in a batch for $1.39, which seems to be quite reasonable. That's without freight. They're waiting on an answer from me, when can I place the order? And they'll deliver them in March. Biloxi is said to be suitable for the subtropics, in fact even the tropics. And it would appear from the paperwork to be suitable for here. Do we have a nursery and a nursery man or nursery woman who's willing to flask all these tissues and care for them until they're large enough to plant out? Do we have enough buyers, given that the variety is speculation? Birds will get most of them unless they're netted. Do we really need blueberries? Aren't they a niche product? They're nice to have and they're rich in antioxidants, etc. But is that where the Food and Farming Alliance should put its effort into? So these two investigations which I've started on behalf of the Alliance show up the challenges. The lack of new varieties is probably not the major limiting factor. There are many excellent varieties, including rare ones, that we could use as stock here. They're not all immediately obvious. It's easier to take seed and cuttings from stock plants here than importing. There's no commercial nursery that I can see that's geared up to propagating the stock. Pacifica, Wayne, has made clear he doesn't see his business as extending in this direction, and Mark Scott wants to stay at his home scale. So I don't see a commercial nursery, and I don't know of a greenhouse facility which is ready and willing and able to take this stuff. And there's no procedure for discovering the varieties that are already here and the owners who are willing to allow them to be used as propagation material. So the conclusions I've reached are very much linked with the existence of the Food and Farming Alliance. There's probably many varieties that are worth importing because they'll widen the season and so on, but there are many excellent species already here, and it's birds, rats, water, nutrients, labour, young people that are the impediments. And I think, having said that, however, many people would grow fruit if they had the stock. And I think if PJ took his apples and his cherries and his lemon myrtles, I mean, I'd buy 20 lemon myrtles because we've just finished the last pack of lemon myrtle tea this afternoon at our house. So I'd buy 20 of them as soon as you turned up. So I think a lot of people would buy these fruit trees if there was a stall at the market, they'd just go. So if that happened, then some of the products would finish up at Prinky, or they'd finish up in roadside stalls, they'd finish up on the market anyway. So I see the supply of nursery stock as one of the major impediments or major tools or vehicles for food security. But I don't wish to place an order for blueberries or anything else until we've got identified someone willing to take on the commercial risk. And it might be for 2 or 3 years, no income until the stuff is ready to sell. But even before that, the Food and Farming Alliance has decided to compile a register of species that are already here and a confidential register of people who are willing to allow a trusted propagator onto their land. And we think that must be private. Even Gotti Strawberry Fields, which is public and open to the public all the time, we couldn't say there's a jaboticaba plant at Gotti's place because people would go and strip his tree. So there has to be, I think, privacy involved in this, but the Alliance is now at the point of wanting people who know where 5 varieties of grapefruit are to say, here are these 5 varieties, and Merv or Fred or Clara or whoever is willing to allow a trusted propagator to go and get some material from them.
You see, I'm not saying there's a fault with all of that. What I'm saying that there's 2,000 people on Norfolk Island, it may be 3,000 people. If everyone grew a blueberry, it'd be like everything else in the past. There's either a feast or a famine. There has to be a balance, and I don't know the answers, but by stimulating this week, the people who have participated this week or just watched and listened and whatever else, they're motivated. But I'm going to say the young people who want to make Norfolk their home, they talk about Norfolk, they've come home, I reckon they're full of puff, because they're the ones that should have been here finding out what's involved or what was or whatever.
Yes.
And we go to a public meeting and somebody there says, why did we have to have people come over here and tell us how to grow potatoes or something? I say if they'd gone to the field days, they would have found out that we were not there being told how to grow potatoes. Even though I didn't go to your place, PJ, there was a discussion somewhere else. It was a discussion on how some people grow potatoes over there and some people grow potatoes here. But I've seen on Gardening Australia, they grow them in potato boxes or milk crates or whatever, so you won't cover all eventualities with a field day. But we have to have, I believe, a balance for local consumption if we can't export.
I think my answer would be the Food and Farming Alliance, which has been established by this community, led by people with of the community with a long traditional background, to put people in touch with people and to address the problems you've solved. Now, this is very early stages. We're only a few weeks into it. Errol, who's the convener, is not on the island, otherwise he'd be here tonight talking about this instead of me. And Wanda is the secretary, and she's still employed, and she's had COVID, so she hasn't been here at all these sessions either. But the Alliance wants to actually create those networks, identify some people who are not full of puff, young people who might have a bit of energy, and say, well, somebody's got some land over here, they're willing to do this. Snowy's prepared to come out and give them some guidance on how to grow potatoes, or PJ, and arrange a field day, or just do what we've done this week, put people in touch with people. There are other connections there. Rebecca's Sustainability Hub will be part of that solution or answer, but I don't think of an answer other than to create a network or clearinghouse to put the connections in place. You can't direct people, you must grow blueberries, you must grow apples for the market. You can't do that, it's a free market, and we're all independent people. We've all got our own pressures and willingness to kill rats or kill birds or whatever. It has to be by a cooperative alliance.
It's interesting when you go to the supermarket and they always seem to have packets of frozen blueberries. Be interesting to know how many get imported, because obviously they're getting used. So maybe...
You said frozen or packet?
Frozen.
Yeah, well, in my fridge at home, I've got a packet of blueberries that have been imported like strawberries. Just you buy at the supermarket.
Oh, fresh.
Fresh. But I wouldn't give you thank you for them. They're still in the fridge. They've been in there a couple of weeks. I'm too lazy to throw it out.
Are they, did you say they're fresh or frozen?
No, I said run out to puff.
Did you say they're frozen?
No, they're fresh.
No, the frozen ones that they
Yeah,
bring
but I'm
in.
saying that you can still buy the fresh ones. But I'm not saying what they like or how they grow them or whatever else.
Yeah, but those fresh ones are not grown here, are they?
No.
That's the point.
They're probably not that fresh.
How many
now.
blueberries does the island consume in a year? that would give us an idea how many should be grown here.
Yeah, well, there was a food contamination thing, the ones that were grown in China, there was it some disease or bowel thing?
I won't buy them from
Yeah, but
China.
that's the frozen ones, you see.
I think the problem there is there's no money in it.
Yeah.
And at the
There was
end,
always-
They're nice to eat though.
There's
Yeah, they're
never
lovely to
money
eat.
in growing your own food.
yeah, I mean, but I think, you know, there's merit in allowing, you know, providing more fruit trees for people to grow themselves and to trade, like we always have. But when you start to go down commercial any berry production, there's just no money in it. Like when I used to work at the Kentia Palm Nursery, that we had strawberries up there, and man, it's a hell of a lot of work. And I think
Yeah, but it's
I
still
think
a
Rosa
question.
made about $150 a week.
When I was in
You know.
Victoria, they had pick your own blueberry farms there, and they do quite well. And I'm not suggesting that necessary for here, but I'm just saying the investigation as to how many are consumed a year on the island of anything would give us an idea about what the requirements are.
There's a chicken and egg question here. You could go into the supermarket and say there's 10 shelves filled with Coca-Cola and Pepsi and this. You don't then draw the conclusion that we must establish a Coca-Cola plant on the island.
No, it's not the same.
And so,
Let's try it.
That's not the same.
so there's a long-term process of migrating to healthier food, more local food with less fuel being used to supply it. But it might not be long-term, because I haven't put on this slide the problems that are facing food production in Australia and the world, and it could be that the price of food here, of imported fresh food, could go sky high, and you have to look at the fuel security and the fuel. Australian agriculture has a deficit of calories of about 5 calories of oil, mainly oil, to 1 calorie of food produced. So Norfolk is at the long end of the supply chains, just from a fuel point of view. So even ignoring health and selection and choice and all the rest of it, there is a fuel problem with food here, and we must overcome it for the sake of the island. And that might mean not having Coca-Cola, but having fresh blueberry juice. Who knows?
Going back to blueberries, I've been following that for quite a while, and I've always thought I'm interested in blueberries because I saw a landline program where a fellow was with some department in Victoria, and he was given the brief to develop blueberries in Victoria. Well, he got a little bit of knowledge with it in Victoria, and he did a bolter. He went up to Tabulin, back at Tenterfield and Lismore, and he produces thousands of varieties. He's produced thousands of varieties of blueberries, and he's looking for a blueberry that he can mechanically harvest, because the cost of harvesting, I understand it's similar to coffee. You can only pick so many, you get green ones, ripe ones, whatever, so you're continually picking. Now, I was thinking here on Norfolk, if we were part of Australia, the visitor that came here and had an organic, sweet, whatever, ripe blueberry, they may be able to take an envelope or a bag back. Exactly what I've been talking to Eric in the past about. Avocados, a Pacific type. Derek Greenwood's has named it the Rolls Royce. Now, I'm not saying it will solve the food situation, but if people could take their fruit back in a certain quantity into Australia, which would be given to their next door neighbour or for their own personal consumption, it's not cases, it would be consumed. It wouldn't interfere with the production at
All right.
Nambour. That's what, you know.
We've had an offer to import 1,000 tube stock of a variety of blueberries that will.
Is it one type, or can you get 6 types in the mix?
Well, the nursery is only offered at one. That's the only one they're propagating. That's not to say that we couldn't commission them to do tissue culture of another lot, but the question is, would you advise PJ and me to go and import 1,000 blueberry tubes?
I'm open to further discussion, yes. Because there's no frost, we could be an early, we could be a late market, I don't know. All I know is that I planted bananas in the valley and I let the cows in on them. They were so much slower than the ones up the top, but that was only...
Really?
Hey?
Really? I would have thought they'd like it down in there.
So did I. But it could have been other factors, but it was just one of those obscure things that I had in my mind. When you go down a valley across somewhere in winter, the valleys are very cold on Norfolk. It doesn't frost, but they're cold. And if the bananas are subtropical plant, it didn't work. So I was looking for something else. And it may be the blueberries down in the valley that like a bit of cold, but not a frost.
There's so many different cultivars now that are...
So many.
No, they're not just blueberries, the other, so the apples, like they're specifically bred for this climate.
Yeah.
What about raspberries? Just out of curiosity, or is it not cold enough for them? They're like a colder climate.
Typically, but that's what I'm saying, there would be a cultivar of raspberry that would grow here.
Yeah, I've identified a nursery that will supply them, but I'm afraid of them escaping.
Yeah, I suppose you should.
They don't escape as bad as blackberries.
We've already got raspberry. What do you
Blackberries.
Blackberries here.
And they haven't really escaped.
It's only one at Anson Bay, isn't it?
Anson Bay, Kingfisher Paddock, there's a bit up there on Ferny Lane.
Yeah.
Is there a potential for blueberries to escape?
I'd have to take on notice to do some research, but I think the answer is no. I've not heard of them escaping anywhere.
I made inquiry because I've been looking at blueberries ever since we got here or before, and there is someone got some blueberries on the island, but they weren't willing to share them because you can layer them and grow them. They're quite easy if you get them, but I'll have to re-examine where they were, but they weren't willing to share them.
But for the reason they thought they might take off as a weed. For the reason they thought it might take off as a weed.
Is that why they wouldn't share?
No, they didn't. They just
No reason.
didn't say.
Just being nasty.
I don't think they would do that.
Yeah.
But you'd have to make sure you had the right variety, of course,
Yeah.
to grow it, because there's lots of varieties.
There's even mangoes, the typical mangoes that we have here don't really bear here.
No, they don't.
But some people do have different varieties that are more suited for the
We
subtropics.
need all that information, because that's a very
It's
frustrating
just
thing.
about looking into, the ones that
I think the Granny Smith apple grows here.
Yeah, well there's an apple called the Tropica that's specifically designed even for hotter climates than Norfolk. And that's
The
just a
Granny
red
Smith
apple.
apple, if we had that, it'd be fantastic.
Yeah. And they are here.
They're probably already
here. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I
You could
don't
always
want...
have a rose apple.
Yeah.
I'm just
Try
conscious.
that.
Yeah, Phil wants to wind up, so I'm going to say...
Because I'm conscious that I'm guessing a lot of people will still want to perhaps come to some of the sessions tomorrow, and not that it's overly early, but it is a 9 o'clock session, and there is a second session in the afternoon tomorrow.
So where's the
I'm
first
going
one?
to the storm thing tomorrow.
So please, nobody escape without filling in a registration of interest for the Alliance, please. On the corner of the table there, near Christelle, please. Anyone who's remotely interested in this subject, please register your interest, and then you'll join a network that will solve some of these problems.
Can we get a big thank you to Jeff?